Okay, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I hope the weather is nicer where you are because it's not nice where I am. Today we're going to be talking about ethnic diversity in health tech, actions to do more. We have an absolutely fantastic panel. My name is Nimi Patel. I'm the Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity at Tech UK. So on the panel today, we've got Patricia Hughes, Divisional Nurse Director at the Royal Marsden NHS Foundation Trust and member of the Shuri Network, Shane Tickell, Strategic Advisor, IMS Maximum, and Vice Chair of the Tech UK Health and Social Care Council, Wendy Marshall, Director for the New Business at Centre UK and member of the Tech UK Health and Social Care Council, Kay Olivier, Patient, Public and Professional Involvement Lead at Imperial College Health Partners and member of the AHSN Network, National Diversity and Inclusion Oversight Group, and Hassan Chowdhury, Digital Health Lead at Health UK at the Department for International Trade. I hope I got everyone's names and titles right. It's looking to be a fantastic discussion. The reason we're here today is to talk about ethnic diversity in health tech and healthcare. Now, for those of you who don't know, Tech UK do a lot of work on kind of D&I generally, and we've been focusing a lot more on becoming more intersectional and expanding beyond just looking at gender and ethnic diversity in silos, but looking at social mobility and neurodiversity and how that can affect the whole D&I landscape. In particular, we've seen that for a lot of organizations who haven't yet, I guess, understood the business case for diversity and inclusion, we have to help them make it. We have to provide those statistics and say, this is why D&I is important. But it's very different for health tech and for healthcare. And I was wondering if I could ask the panel to say hi and to expand on why D&I makes a difference in health tech and healthcare. Patricia, can I bring you in?
Oh, you started on me first. Okay. Right. I'm Trish Hughes. I'm a Divisional Nurse Director at the Royal Marsden, and I've worked in the NHS for nearly 30 years now in a variety of different roles. So inclusion, diversity inclusion, very important to me. As you get further up the ladder, as we know, you don't necessarily see people of my colour up there. So I think that, that really is important to me, that we ensure that the workforce is diverse and it's actually representative of where we live in today, particularly for London, where I think we're looking at 50% BAME or people of colour. So that's really important. It's important for creativity and innovation. Obviously, everyone thinks differently, and we need to bring those different experiences and thoughts to the table. So that's important. Actually, which is really important to me as a nurse, improved health outcomes. If we haven't got a diverse senior leadership team, diverse members at a board level, how can we making sure that we're getting the best views, for our patients? Actually, it's been shown that turnover declines, so there is an economical argument for having a more diverse workforce. And what I like to end on is actually, if we improve the experience for our BAME people, we don't know whether we like saying BAME now, so people of colour staff, if we improve it for them, we improve it for everybody. So in my mind, it's a win-win. Thank you.
Definitely something to pick up on there, the terminology BAME, as we go later on. Shane, can I bring you in?
Thank you, and thanks very much for inviting me along. So I've spent 10 years leading as a CEO of a company, and I've started some new enterprises. But I go back 30 odd years, and I have to call this out right at the start. I'm really shocked and embarrassed about what I've learned, particularly over the last few weeks, where people have shared the experiences that they've had of being from different ethnic backgrounds. When I arrived in London as a young, naive northerner, I was lucky enough to work in a hospital that was predominantly managed by females, that had people from every part of the world, from the Philippines to Egypt to Morocco, Africa, the Caribbean, and it was such a diverse place. It was a phenomenal place to be and to live and to learn with people. So, and that was also at a time when we saw things like apartheid come down and Nelson Mandela be released and to become president of his country. And I thought we were all being a lot more enlightened. So I've been lucky throughout my career to work in diverse areas and also not diverse areas. The thing I have seen consistently is bullying. And I've tried to stamp that out in whatever shape or form that it is. But a couple of things that really shocked me, and just a little bit about my experiences in doing some research for this call. A few years ago on my board, I had 10 people, and one of my colleagues said one day, you do realize that 50% of our board is female? And I said, yes, obviously I see that, but so what? And they said, well, it's a thing. And I didn't realize, I remember reading an article that Condoleezza Rice, who served in the American government, was heading up a global drive to improve diversity, and particularly females on boards. And I was embarrassed to see that. And then more recently as last week, a really interesting conversation I had with a very good friend of mine, who I would say is one of the world's experts in what she does in health technology. And she is transgender. And she said there was no doubt in her mind that when she was growing up as a male, she would not have had the opportunities if she'd have been female. And when she transgendered and came into the room as a female, she noticed that people spoke over her and stopped listening to her. And she asked her female colleagues, what is this? And they said, that's just quite normal, which I think is absolutely shocking. So I've been fortunate to grow up. I used to say that I didn't see color, and that's not true. Of course I see color, but I see people first. I don't understand how we're not more enriched. And my own companies have absolutely built better products, had a better environment by just employing people from different backgrounds and listening and learning. So I'm keen to hear what everybody else has got to say today, and I hope I can add some suggestions as to how we can make the environment better for everybody. Thank you.
Definitely something that we can also look at, kind of what does it mean to not see colour, and how do we progress with that. Kay, can I bring you in on this as well?
Hi. Yeah, interesting observations by my two colleagues there. It's an interesting dynamic at the moment. We've, just gone through COVID, post-COVID, and then, the uprising of the inequalities across both sides of the pond. And it really has impacted on quite a few people that I come into contact with. And to be perfectly honest, even I was shocked. If you're a person of colour, you've obviously, faced some sort of discrimination, in your lifetime. If you haven't, then you've been very, very lucky. But it was interesting because I went to a seminar yesterday. It was called Melanin Medics. And it's a group of doctors across our system nationally getting together to talk about their experiences. And I cannot tell you how shocked I was at the bullying and harassment of some BME doctors. And so things haven't really got any better. And I think things have got slightly worse. But for me, one thing I will have to say right up front is we have a fantastic health service. I've spent time in the USA and I know how bad things are there. So not to take away anything from, the NHS, because it's a fantastic organization, but we just have to get real now, guys. This is a great opportunity that we've got. We have got to now start looking at these issues across all of the systems. Tech is no different from any other system that we work in. It's about understanding those differences, and it is about seeing colour. Shane, I'll just pull you up on that one. And we can talk more about that later on. But it absolutely is about seeing those differences, and it's those differences that make a fundamental difference across our system.
Thanks, Kay. Yeah, it's very true. We start off with the idea that we should be colourblind, but the reality is, as someone in the group chat has mentioned, not seeing colour blinds you to the difficulties people of colour face. Hassan, if we can bring you in.
Thank you so much, Nimi. I'm really proud to be here today. Wonderful panel. My background, former social worker for the elderly and sensory impaired in Hackney. I've been an NHS analyst. I've walked across wards trying to get paper notes. So I understand some of the situations that have been mentioned. I've seen the bullying and the harassment on the front line of people in health and social care. I was a founder and I've had an exit of a health tech company. So I've seen how difficult it's been sometimes when people see me and they think, well, why would we sell to you? Why would we buy from you? That's the problem that I've faced, right? We've seen this. On why it's important, the inequality in the workplace leads to bullying. And that mirrors the inequalities that we see in health in our communities, which leads to death. So yes, we can make economic arguments, and we should, but this is a moral argument. And if you aren't going to stand on the right side of this, you should move out of the way. because this is a time now that we need to create that change, especially in digital health, where people are passionate. They come forward because they want to see change. They want to use technology to improve the patient experience, their clinical experience, and what's happening in the system. And I think any diversity we see in health tech is despite the system, not because of it.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And Wendy, can I also bring you into this conversation?
Before I start, I don't think my company would forgive me if I didn't correct your pronunciation of our company, Cerner. And I know there are members that are sitting
Apologies.
Oh my goodness. No, that's fine. That's fine. We're known as Kerner, so you did well, Nimi, don't worry. So I agree with everything that's already been said. And I think that, you know, one of the exam question that we had as a panel was why should this be important? I'd go as far as saying it shouldn't be important. It's what should be expected. And if we really look at the population that we serve as health and care providers, we should be really should be representing the diversity of the population that we serve. And if we don't do that as a health and tech industry, then we're failing. And I think that for me is where I'm really pleased for my transition from healthcare, I'm a nurse by background, into health tech. And as you know, Trish has mentioned, I mean, I came up through the ranks of the NHS and I saw the harassment and bullying, the subjective to the racism that, you know, our staff are experiencing today. But I would say, folks, this is nothing new. It's just being talked about and it's been exposed.
It's a good thing we are talking about it now, because that sounds absolutely devastating. So looking more widely, have you seen any progress been made in the area of diversity and inclusion in health tech in the past year or so? Shane, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. I think two great initiatives, but I am embarrassed that they're needed. One is One Health Tech, which has itself diversified from being a female promoting organization to being one that's more inclusive of all people. And the other one is the creation of the Shuri Network. And I was at the launch of that last year at the summer school. And I have to say, I mean, and I went to speak to some of the people afterwards, and I've got to know some of them more since then, and we're going to do some work together. But I'm embarrassed that we have to, worse than embarrassed, shocked that that's necessary. But the time over the last year, what I've seen is people start to talk about the differences of and the challenges and the bullying that's really held people back. And let me just share a couple of examples. As a chief executive, one of the most privileges I have and have had is people come to my office or phone me up and say the most personal things to them. And that's something that you take home and it really does affect you. And it's a privilege when they share with you their challenges and their difficulties. And two people in my career have said that their bullying was so extreme, they wanted to go to sleep and never wake up again. And I think these are people with families. These are people who were immensely professional and brilliant at what they did. But the bullying had such an effect on them that that's how they felt about it. So I think what's really important is, and I've heard of suggestions and talking to people about creating safe environments and spaces. And we've seen people come out with lanyards that are green to say safe to speak to. I don't think that's good enough. I really don't. And I think you shouldn't have to wear a badge. What we all need to do is create an environment that actually is safe for people to speak up. So a couple of things. As a leader, whatever level that you're at, I think you have a responsibility to not sit and wait for people to come and tell you you've got a problem. And also you do become cocooned by people around you. And I think that happens at every level of my career. And you've got to punch outside of that. You've got to go and actively seek things out and go and talk to people. So one of the things I learned over the last few years was to go and talk to people and ask them, not just, you know, is there anything I should know as CEO? What do I need to know? What can I change? Because people find it intimidating to speak to someone at a different perceived level. I think what you've got to go and do is actively ask people, how is it for you? And not just ask it once. You must continuously go. And this isn't a false thing by any means. You have to live this. And I'm just very fortunate to have come from a background where I feel that it's diversity for me. And Kay, forgive me if I didn't explain it very well. I used to say I didn't see color. I used to say I don't see gender. I see people first. And now, of course, I do see color because I hadn't realized that how difficult and different it was for different people. So people like One Health Tech, Shuri, the fact that we're having this conference today, for me, is a step forward. And I feel so passionate about doing something more about it, because the last 3 decades at least, I thought we'd achieved more.
Definitely, we're really encouraged not just to talk the talk, but walk the walk. Trish, how do we create this inclusive culture that Shane is talking about?
Well, it's quite interesting. I pick up on Shane's point about visible leadership from the top, and I think that's a really important point. It's not going out once, you know, in that tokenistic way. It's having that regular connections with the people that you work with on the ground. So I think, you know, I would definitely say visible leadership is important. I mean, I've had ups and downs in the NHS. I've worked in the NHS nearly 30 years. The improvement has been made in terms of when we look at the work that Yvonne Coghill and team have done around workforce race equality standards. Yes, okay, there is still improvement to go, but I think that it did open people's eyes as to what is going on and looking at the inequity in bands. So I do think that's really important. And picking up on what Shane said about the Shuri Network, a very active network to support women in tech, but also it's reached out wider to the NHS. I mean, you know, I'm not necessarily a techie person. I want to get more involved in tech because I want to realise the benefits of technology, but you know, I am a nurse, but I looked at the Shuri Network's membership, and a lot of that is nursing and medical, because we do need something like this. And they are having those sort of challenging conversations and asking the challenging questions. So they should be really proud of, you know, what they've achieved and what they will go on to achieve. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. And Hassan, this idea of visible leadership has been woven into everything we've spoken about. How do we elevate the voices of BAME people?
So I think the discussion about visible leadership hasn't been set correctly. I don't want to see the same old guard, jobs for the boys, who've got all those jobs and they hand them out to each other, passing over dedicated and well-qualified and deserving people of color to say they are now visible leaders. I want to see Black and minority ethnic people. I want to see people of color in leadership. I want there to be some form of commission where we're saying, why have these dedicated and deserving people not got those roles? And we should accelerate them into those leadership roles, because a lot of them deserve it and they haven't been given those opportunities. So yes, great, wear a badge. But in the end, I'm really saying that we need to see more people of color being given their chance to be leaders. The decision-making isn't inclusive. So it shouldn't be people making decisions for people of color. It should be those who are making decisions should be an inclusive group. That's what's needed. And until that happens, we're not going to see change. We need boards that are inclusive and decision-making that's inclusive.
Definitely. And Wendy, a question from the audience. Silence is normalized. How do the panel suggest that we engage with all that the voice is collective? Have you seen any initiatives where this may be happening?
I haven't. I know certainly the initiatives that we're taking it in my company, and it goes back to something I think probably Shane or Tricia said. And Trish, by the way, I'm a nurse by background, and I wasn't a techie person either. So you and I need to connect, because I now find myself in a leadership role for a technology company, which was not on my career path at all. But I think that it's having those open forums and that place of safety, and really giving people an opportunity to talk about their experiences. And that's something that we are about to set. I'm kind of spoiling it a little bit for those in Cerner that are on the call. It's something that we're going to be setting up very shortly to create that platform to really try and address some of the silence, because as Shane said, and Trish and Kate, you know, this has been, people have been experiencing their experiences for a lifetime in some instances. And I think it's about giving people a platform to safely talk about their experience without any repercussions. And I think that we can create that position of safety, and it really does. And I think as leaders, I do think we have a responsibility to create that safe environment for our teams to really have that open dialogue. And I do think it starts there. It starts with understanding what people have been going through, because no matter how much you think you know somebody, you really, really don't necessarily understand their experiences until you give them a platform to enable them to share that with you.
Definitely, thank you. And Kay, how do you give people this safe space? What initiatives have you seen work? And I guess more importantly, what initiatives have you seen not work?
That's a really interesting one, given what we've just kind of, or still going through actually, because I was having a really hard time, to be perfectly honest, and I didn't think my team, bless them, you know, really understood where I was going, and I was getting very tearful. Although we were locked down and working from home, I just didn't feel that the parameters that they put in place for the organisation suited me. They weren't people who I thought I could go to and talk to about these issues. So it's really, really timely that within North West London, one of my CCG colleagues had also worked on the Grenfell issue, and she'd worked on Grenfell for 3 years, Samira, and I bless her. She started this Community Voices programme, and I jumped on board because I'm a patient public involvement lead. But what it did for me was probably save my life, honestly, because talking to like-minded colleagues across North West London who also had experienced the same things that I had experienced, talking to people from the community who'd also experienced things through COVID, and it just became this people-powered group. There was no particular agenda. We were collecting stories from different parts of the community. And what we intend to hopefully now do is play that back to the system, say, look, this is another way of engaging, listening and hearing those voices in their own words, in the context that actually suits them. And it's not always about bringing people into our system. It's about going out there, hearing those voices and allowing them to speak with their own tongue and listening and helping to shape services that meet their needs. And tech is no different from any other system in our NHS service.
Thank you. We've got some really good discussion happening in the group chat function. So if you're not involved, please do get involved now. We've got someone asking about sort of how do we ensure that ethnic minorities aren't just seen as to fill a quota or to fill a shortlist. Hassan, could you come in on that?
Thank you. So we've all seen token gestures, and I think the symbolism of all of that is people get fed up. For me, that real change is not picking somebody for a leadership position just because they may be Black and minority ethnic. It's because they are deserving of that role. They got their fair chance. And if you've got enough people within your leadership to be inclusive, so you may not be Black and minority ethnic, but you understand the issues, and those in your group may also include people who are Black and minority ethnic, that for me is how you remove the tick box culture, because then you'll drive change. And I don't think we're going to see a change at the front line until we see a change in the boardroom. And for me, that's where the focus has to be.
I definitely agree. We see in a lot of D&I initiatives that organizations have shortlists at the beginning, but once their diversity and inclusion improves at a top level, they're able to make conscious decisions about how to get more diverse people into their workforce and to elevate them.
Yeah, and then one thing just to say, that I'm not saying that we don't already have great people who are Black and minority ethnic in leadership positions. We do. And some people will look at that and think, well, we must be doing okay. And that the problem with that is it ignores the problem that you have to work 3 times harder or 5 times harder because you know that the standards for you are different. And that's not fair. So the progress that we've seen, again, I say, is despite the system, not because of it.
And Trish, how would role models affect that?
See what you think, but this was for...
Sorry about that, Trish. How do you think role models impact what's been going on in the health tech industry?
So I think role models in the health tech industry and role models in the NHS and any other industry, role models are important, and I think it's role modeling, you know, the behaviours we expect to see. So, okay, we're not there yet with people of colour in senior leadership role, but I think picking up on what Shane's saying, great to have the visible leadership, but also how, you know, when your staff are telling you of those stories, how are you calling behaviours out? How are you verbalising on the behaviours that you expect to see in your organisation and that you will not tolerate certain behaviours, racist behaviours. So role modelling plays an important part. Yes, of course, we've got work to do in getting people of colour into senior leadership roles, but also, as we say, our white allies have work to do in terms of we need you to call those behaviours out. The more we call those behaviours out, the better the working environment is going to be. So that's my perspective anyway.
Thank you. And Wendy, we've got a question from the audience. Do you think it's important not only to have a forum, make it clear that people speaking in these forums about their experiences do not have an expectation on them to provide the answers? I can't tell you how many times that being the only ethnic minority person in the room has made me the absolute spokesperson for all ethnic minorities. How can people have a safe space, and where does the responsibility lie to turn the discussion into action?
And I read that chat as well. Actually, did make me smile, because that's something that, you know, as my colleagues and I have been thinking about putting this forum together, we're going to make it explicitly clear that the responsibility to change or to act on, you know, what's shared, once we would agree what those actions are, is not on the responsibility of those that are coming forward. And I think this is where it's been really enlightening to see the diversity. If we talk about the BLM protests that have been taking place in London, where the diversity of the people attending, it's not just been those from the BAME community. Because if it was really left to us to address the problem and try and fix this, we would have done that years ago. So I think that the reassurance that we're certainly going to be giving our associates is that the responsibility is not on the BAME community or those that come forward. It really is those of us as leaders, but also across the organisation. And the more diversity we have in trying to address those problems, in my opinion, the more successful that we're going to be.
Thank you. Now, as we get through kind of the last 30 minutes of this conversation, wow, they've completely flown by. Shane, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the practical actions that you've seen work and, I guess more importantly, not work.
So what I have seen work is encouragement, support, coaching. And I do remember quite recently reflecting on my entire career, where I've worked for many managers, leaders, directors, CEOs. Only 3 times in my career have I had a leader who has encouraged me and given me the freedom to grow and to achieve the best. Virtually every single other one, for some reason or other, has held me back, whether consciously or unconsciously. And that's quite a damning thing. I've had 5 bosses fired because I stood up for something. So, but it was pointed out to me at rather a young age, and something that I think we may have lost, and I'd like to ask other people in the audience on the panel. In my early 20s, I was rather bold, if I can put it that way, and I went to one of my bosses one day and said, they were very good at teaching. I had wonderful career teaching for many years, and one of the courses was assertiveness, and they laughed at me and said, why do you need to be assertive? I said, well, because I don't always say the things that I need to, and I feel that I get held back, and I'm not sure I can communicate it well. And they were a bit dismissive, but I persisted, and I went on an assertiveness course because I didn't understand the difference between aggressiveness and passiveness. And the only thing I could tell you was I didn't feel comfortable. And I haven't heard assertiveness training talked about for the last decade or more. And I wonder if, so the thing I have listened carefully to people say, I've been spoken over, I've been shut down. And the thing about bullying, whether it's racism, whether it's genderism, whatever it is, it happens at a time and a place. And particularly, I think, in healthcare, when you're not expecting it. And you come into your working environment, you want to do the best. Most people want to do the best every single day. And somebody takes this action against you, probably in front of people. I've had it to me in board meetings and thought, where did that come from? And your natural reaction is to proceed and get on with the task in hand. But you know that you're upset in some way, shape or form. I think what assertiveness training, and as I've revised that, gone back over it and thought, is actually allows you to stop and say, actually, that's not okay. And maybe I can't deal with it at this moment, but I'm not going to let it go. And I think, Wendy said this, that safe place, some things that I think have worked really well by allowing people and encouraging them to get together, that it's not just a safe place to talk, but that people are worried. I've heard people who are gay who've said, we're worried about the repercussions of making a statement. And that repercussion will not be obvious, it will not be spoken to, but they are convinced that it will hold them back. Now, I believe some of that's very, very real, but I believe some of it's perceived. So I think as leaders, we must create that safe space, but allow a channel for it to come that is comfortable and is taken seriously. And the other thing, just very quickly, just before lockdown, I was very privileged to, I've known the team, Maxine and Lou, who've run One Health Tech since before it was One Health Tech. And I've been a big proponent of encouraging people, because several of my female colleagues always said they felt there was a glass ceiling they couldn't push forward. And they were appealing for coaches just before lockdown for an event, for sort of speed coaching, where we had a couple of hours. And I said, I'd love to do coaching, but I feel it's not my place. They said, no, quite the contrary, actually. We want to see more diverse coaches. And I think that opportunity to listen and coach and encourage people, often the perception that's holding you back is sometimes a perception, or as leaders and experienced people have just lived things, we can help them look at a different route. And I think those three things, so assertiveness training, encouraging people, and taking that safe place messaging into your organization and just speaking openly about it.
Yeah, and I think those three things combined sort of build a culture of trust, which is ever so needed. Hassan, is there a glass ceiling in health tech?
Yes, I would say there's definitely a glass ceiling in healthcare, in social care, and in health tech. And that's why my point, to reiterate, has always been about seeing people on the other side of that glass ceiling who look like me. And one of the reasons why I don't like the phrase BAME is because the Black experience is different to the experience of other ethnic minorities. And let's face it, it's typically worse. And that's what I think we need to be seeing more of, because if I was seeing Black people and minority ethnic people, I would still be thinking, wow, this is something that's amazing. There's inclusivity above me. And I don't see that. And if I do see things like that, I know that person has got there despite what should have been there. So let me make it absolutely clear. If we are going to accelerate those deserving leaders, we have to have an intervention. We can't leave it to businesses to say, well, we'll get there. And the health service needs to be front and center in that, because the bullying and the harassment and the discrimination is out of order. And the people that we see leaving the profession or wanting to leave the profession means that we're all poorer for it. And health inequalities in our community will lead to deaths. It has to start somewhere. I think it's leadership.
Okay, so we've spoken about leadership. Now we're going to follow on a different angle. Is education the key to changing attitudes and ensuring inequalities are ruled out?
Yeah, I do. And it's a shame to say this in 2020, that do we really have to go back and give everyone, this diversity training, or, it's just unbelievable to be talking about training staff now. But I really do feel that there's a lot of people that still don't get it. I speak to system leaders all the time that are thinking, so what is the diversity angle here? I don't really get it. And I get quite irritated, because this isn't new. This is going back, many, many, many years. So maybe if that's where we have to start, then that is where we have to start. Make sure you get the right trainings in, make sure you get it focused, make sure you get it tailored to suit your organization. But if that's what we have to do to really raise people's levels of consciousness, of unbiased, interventions and making decisions that are unbiased, then absolutely it's spot on. I tend to have this sort of love-hate relationship with the NHS. I'm a little bit less radical than Hassan, but I can really see where he's coming from. I think I'm just a lot older, a little bit sort of mellowed and downtrodden, and I think things will happen in its own time. But things are happening very, very slowly, and I really do think we do need a real intervention now. Otherwise, we can't leave it to chance. It's not going to happen by natural causes. We really do think have to say, well, absolutely now we have to make a stance. This is what we're going to have to do to make things change, at the speed that we think they should be.
Definitely. And I think the aspect of what you're saying that people just don't understand is the reason we have these webinars. And I'm so excited that one day we won't need this anymore. It will just become the norm. Wendy, how have you seen sort of patient care change with regards to kind of the changes in racism and diversity landscape?
I think Trisha's probably better placed to answer. I'm sort of far removed from the bedside itself, but I think that in my experience, when I was certainly working as a nurse and then became a senior nurse within my organisation, I think that I certainly can think of many examples where, again, where there are certain things that you do or you experience within your culture as a person coming from a West Indian family that you see play out in the way that patients respond to treatment or the way that they respond to healthcare professionals. And it can be misunderstood. And I think, and I saw the way that some of my white counterparts would react to Black patients, for example, simply because they didn't understand the way that they were perhaps responding to a particular question. And some of the times it was just down to communication. They didn't understand the question that was being asked of them, so therefore didn't give the appropriate response. And that could lead sometimes to misdiagnosis or to treatment being withheld or the wrong type of treatment being prescribed. So I think as you start to see the diversity within healthcare, so you're coming in as a patient and you're being cared for individuals that look like you, that can help to break down some of those barriers. I think within health tech, we still have a long way to go. I mean, you know, Shane was talking about the makeup of the board and, you know, they were talking about that glass ceiling. I am a Black female within the health tech industry. Black, double whammy, being Black and female. And, you know, I'd like us to perhaps have a forum particularly talking about that issue at some point in the future too.
Thank you. And Trish, what you know, we can't not talk about the elephant in the room. What has COVID-19 really done to highlight the impact of race and ethnicity on patient care and the NHS workforce?
Well, we can see in front of our eyes, can't we, that what we've been saying, you know, what we're talking about today and what we've been talking about for years, you know, when you look at the more senior roles, you don't see many people of colour. So where are the people of colour? They're at the front line. And, you know, this hasn't had, and COVID has had an impact on the people at the front line, you know, and again, they've had challenges in terms of trying to get the correct PPE. So I think the COVID-19 has really brought this to the forefront. We've seen the huge inequalities, you know, that people of colour, you know, have faced. So, you know, I think that's really opened people's eyes. Really, as people of colour, we know it's probably not, a lot of it's not come as a surprise to us. We know about the inequalities. We know about the challenges of accessing healthcare services, you know, the challenges of being listened to, understood and communicated with, you know, so, and it's you know, when you see it, I mean, it's devastating really. So, yeah, but again, you know, what's the action now? What can we learn from it? Where do we go? And I think that's an important thing. You know, we've been having these conversations for years, as we know, but you know, it's now about action and what do we do?
Hassan, what do we do? What is post-COVID COVID life for ethnicity and healthcare and tech?
So what I'm hearing from lots of colleagues is that people feel they're being labelled almost as BAME. Their opinion is BAME, almost moving aside from the fact that they might be a consultant. Or the challenge for us is to not just ask, not just to listen, but to believe. Because what we're hearing is lots and lots of what people are calling microaggressions. You know, I feel that something's just happened here, but I'm not sure anyone's going to believe me. And that kind of thing can be really, really difficult for somebody when they're trying to go to sleep at night. It's almost like the gaslight. I feel that we are not believing our staff on the front line when they say they're being pushed forward. Why is it that so many Filipino nurses have passed away? Why so many Black and why so many Indian and Pakistani doctors? Why is it that they're passing away? The nurses and the doctors seem to be repeatedly of ethnic minority people of color. There's something wrong there. And when we're hearing privately, we're hearing of being told, no, you go. It's almost as if there is a culture of fear and silence in those areas. So COVID-19 has exposed that problem and put those people on the front line to die. We've seen that in social care, where people who are on the very lowest economic rung of the ladder are forced between caring for people without PPE or losing their jobs. That's the kind of thing that we need to tackle. We need to be brave, and it takes moral courage.
Thanks, Hassan. It's incredibly grim that a pandemic has brought up this issue. Kay, what practical example could you give us of how you'd like to see the health tech industry and the NHS work together to ensure that diversity and inclusion are at the heart of any digital transformation.
I think we've covered a lot of it already, actually. It's really got to be about a wider diversity of people having those conversations with techies. You know, it's no longer acceptable that we actually adopt or implement technology that hasn't been tested, or you understand the communities that you're actually serving. It really does do a disservice to the people who are going to use that technology, using it, and on the other end of that technology, that you really don't understand how this is going to impact on those diverse communities. We don't want to exacerbate health inequalities, and there's a real danger post-COVID that we're using a lot of technology now, and we really don't know how that's going to impact on people, but we're implementing because we have to recognize social distancing. We have to make sure that the NHS, when they're actually adopting this technology, that the companies understand those diverse communities and it's tested on a wider diversity of people. Look at track and trace. It's been tested in the Isle of Wight. Will that work in a diverse area? Will it work in London? We don't know, but we're going to implement it in London, but there's very, very low diversity in the Isle of Wight. Those sorts of things that these days is just not acceptable. You've got to make sure we're having conversations with the diversity of people, PPI leads, nurses, administrators. They need to be around the table talking to the techies and the companies about and questions that techies probably don't ask each other, but we will ask very different questions and make sure that they really do have access to those diverse communities and patients who also should be around that table having those conversations.
Wendy, if it's okay, I'd like to bring you in on this as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with Kay. And as Kay was talking, I'm just thinking about some potential actions that we can take within our own organisation. And I think it's also about including patients. I think certainly from a procurement perspective, when we're looking at healthcare providers and healthcare organisations that are going out to procurement for technology services, it's really looking at who are those that are making the decisions and making the decisions about who they choose as those chosen providers, and making sure that there is representation on those panels and including patients. We're starting to see that just in very small numbers, where you're actually having patients who are part of the decision-making process, and having patients from diverse backgrounds. At the end of the day, they are going to be the recipients and the ones at the receiving end of that technology. So I think it's really looking at who are the decision makers and making sure that you do have cross-representation, not just from a diverse point of view, but also from an end user perspective as well.
Thank you. And Shane, what more can we do? I guess there's two sets of this question. There's the professional side of what industries can do, but there's also the personal side. What can we as individuals do to forward the BAME agenda?
So the first part of that question, I think professionally, I want people to understand that as leaders, we're looking for more leaders all the time to step up. And from me questioning people from different backgrounds and from different genders, they say that one thing, it's a theme. I won't say it's everybody says this, but a theme is there is a confidence issue. And I did hear this on a White Allies conference a couple of weeks ago. So it helped me back up my own research. There's a confidence issue that sometimes people feel oppressed, are actually oppressed, and that there's only so much that they can push themselves forward to. So firstly, I want to encourage people, and we can take actions to encourage people, let people know that it's welcome. I employ on attitude and aptitude. And we're always looking for the right attitude. We can give people skills and knowledge and experience, and we can, I think, give them buddies, people who can help them navigate a new organization. And certainly one wants to invest in people in training and give them a career path. And I think it's huge for me that the representation of different diversity across society has to be represented in our technology. So on a personal level, I think I've given several examples throughout the meeting. I would encourage, I don't think you have to be a chief exec. I don't think you have to sit on a board. I think at every level of every role that I've ever experienced and encouraged others, you have an opportunity to bring people along with you. And I would just encourage people to be assertive and to push where they can. And if they and draw on strength from other people, and I've had people that don't work for me who reach out and they say, look, I like some of the things that you've said, can I talk to you about them? And I love the opportunity to coach and encourage, and I would encourage people more and more to do that, because actually what I get back from it is absolutely enlightening. I'm coming up to 50 this year. I've spent 3 decades working. I'm still learning every single day about the challenges, and hope that some of those actions, we must encourage people to come forward and give them an environment that they're allowed to experiment, try things out, and not punish them for failure as well.
Thank you. And Hassan, what do you think is the most important step that we can take to make progress faster? What's different about now than, say, 10 years ago?
So let me give you a quick anecdote, true story. A young black man is leading a meeting in the NHS, chairing the meeting, and then someone comes in and assumes that he's the note taker, right? Now that, to me, is the state of play. If only we can keep showing people, no, why would you assume that young man is that? It's only when you start to see your leaders and those who are able to make decisions being different that you'll start to make the change. So I think that's the quickest thing we can do. There are lots of other things that my fellow panelists have said. We need allies. And I'm very glad Shane's just mentioned about being on a White Allies conference. And I can imagine how difficult it must be at this stage to be thinking, how can we be a good ally? And it's not easy, right? And my role here on this panel isn't meant to be the most controversial person, but somehow I think I have been. I think that without allies, we will go nowhere, because you can't change this from the outside. You need everyone coming together. You need inclusive decision-making. I've heard a comment about how we need to focus on user needs. Absolutely. But I'd like to take us back a second. Health tech needs funding, it needs capital, private equity, venture capital. I've heard diverse teams privately ask each other, should we have a token white person on our board so that we might be able to get hold of this kind of funding? That's a horrific situation to be in. Now that's the problem that we have right now. People are not believed. There's no confidence in them. So I appreciate there's a conversation going on in the group chat about confidence, but it's only when people are having confidence in you that you can really start to find your own steam. And I think that's what we need more.
Hassan, I think nothing you've said today is controversial. Diversity and equality are never controversial topics, definitely not. Trish, what is the most important thing that we can do going forward? And I guess 2 parts to that question, one in the short term, one in the long term.
Yeah. So I think Hassan and Shane picking up your point about action, and I think around the mentoring and coaching is really important. As a nurse, that's part of my role, and I spend a lot of time encouraging, people of colour to go for promotions. They don't always have the confidence, but I do encourage that. I've been doing that for a long time, so that's really important. What Hassan picks up about is our white allies. So I think in the short term, we need our white allies standing by us side by side, calling out the behaviour, providing mentoring and coaching opportunities, going to the white ally conferences so they can understand, we can't do this alone. So that's good short term. And medium term is probably just coming up, how do we work, the health tech work more closely with the NHS, and to come up with plans, but certainly mentoring and coaching. So I'll be holding you to that, Shane. If there's anyone I want to send for mentoring and coaching, it's really important. There's so much to learn from you in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of your feeling that assertiveness, how, sometimes people of colour can be perceived as being aggressive. So it's that balance, isn't it, on how you can be assertive but not aggressive. And I think we've got things to learn from our white allies. And I think what we're learning in this Black Lives Matters, in terms of, look who's been standing by the side of us in terms of the protest. We have to work together on this. As Hassan said, we're not going to get anywhere alone.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And Wendy, can I bring you in on this as well?
I think it's already been summed up really well by Trish and Hassan. I think it's about getting our white allies to really come on board, because as I said, if we're relying on, Black people, people of colour making a change, it's not going to happen as quickly as it should do, because look where we are today. And again, it's always surprising to hear the response of a white counterpart to some of the stories that are being told quite openly, just how surprised people are that this is still happening in 2020. So I echo everything that everybody said. I think the mentorship, I think the working together, and I do think there is still an opportunity for the health tech and the NHS to come together and work more inclusively on this issue.
Thank you, Wendy. Kay, how do we become more inclusive by design?
Inclusive by design. You know, I don't want to force, I don't like tokenism. I really think, you know, you just set yourself back if you look at tokenism. And I have to, you know, listen to the conversation. It's not always just a black and a white issue. You know, there's diversity within diversity. I mean, the tech industry is not, as Hassan just pointed out, has a lot of South Asians. In fact, it's probably overrepresented of South Asian community. But where are the African and Caribbean communities? And this is why, again, I don't like this BAME. We are not a homogenous group. We have very different experiences, and therefore we need to recognize that. And this is what tends to happen when you get some token person on a board. You've got now this black or brown face, and therefore, there you go, we've got our quota. And it may not be the right person. It depends on your values and your assumptions about what does my position mean to this organization? Now I've got here, let me pull up the drawboard, you know, or the ladder up. You know, I'm not saying that because you've got to that position, it's your whole responsibility to make it good for everybody else, but you have to make sure that you're not choosing tokens. So design, I think we have to probably have some, you know, accelerated kind of programs. We've had them in the NHS before, they haven't really worked. I've been through one of those breaking through programs myself many years ago, on what has happened with that. So again, I think there has to be some sort of discussion with a lot of BME networks to find out exactly what they feel. I don't think there's one solution here. I think, again, it needs a consultation, it needs discussion from BAME staff, from you know, even, as you say, white allies, to really come together and say, how can we accelerate this issue? How can we stomp it out in the NHS once and for all? And I think collectively we will get there, but everyone needs to be on the same page. Everyone needs to understand, you know, unconscious bias for a start. That's the starting point, because people still don't get it. And if they don't get it, we're never going to move on.
Thank you, Kay. And this question is for Hassan and Shane. How do we make diversity a societal question instead of a minority issue?
I'll go first. The challenge for us is to take advantage of this current situation, and we cannot let this opportunity pass. There's a momentum right now. So when we say Black Lives Matter, when we think about what happened with Grenfell, people are now starting to realize that we need that change. We've got to take advantage of it. And because we are the community as well, whether we're in health and social care or health tech, we can have an influence, but we touch so much of society. If you're going to, and we've seen this where there's been racism from patients towards a nurse of color, right? And we might challenge it there and then, but eventually the fact that you're being cared for and looked after by people of color has an impact on society. We need to make more of that.
Hassan's given an exceptionally eloquent answer. I'd like to think that we as leaders need to give example to others and encouragement to stand up and do more. I think on a practical level, I remember working for a brilliant CEO when I was very young. And she was a nurse and she became a CEO of 2 hospitals at the same time. She was brilliant. And she used to have breakfast coffees where she would sample and invite maybe 10 people from across the organization, where we would sit next to a surgeon, a porter, someone from stores, nurses, midwives, laboratory technicians. And she would invite them in quite early in the morning for a coffee and a croissant. And she would ask people questions. And what they encouraged was also go back and do that in your departments, in your teams. And I think the more that we talk about challenges in society and biases, what is affecting us, then I think it's hopefully we can start to change and keep the change going from today. My single biggest fear when I was thinking about this and talking with my young children, well, I say they're young, they're in their teens and in their early 20s now, And they've grown up with a completely different environment, I think. We've tried to be as open with them and inclusive, and I'm delighted to say that I think they are in their friends and what they do. My horror was thinking, when I grew up in the 70s and the world looked a very different place, and I still see remnants of that in some of my elders, is it going to take another 2 generations before we really drive this out? And then actually I have hope that actually it isn't, because we're having this conversation today. So I hope we keep talking about it, and that this isn't a flash in the pan. It becomes ingrained in our society, ingrained in everything that we do. And at the slightest, I think the prize for everybody is to encourage everybody to move forward and fulfill their potential in life, regardless of their background, regardless of their color, regardless of their religion or their gender, is the opportunity to encourage everybody to contribute to society.
Thank you for that. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I think we've heard from fantastic panelists around the actions of what we can do to, I guess, to do more to forward the ethnic diversity agenda. Some of the things that I've mentioned about what can we do differently that we haven't done before: elevate visible leadership, remove tick box culture, change in boardroom, equals a change on the front line. And a comment from the audience that I loved, although it's very sad, is that we are not judged by our actions, but by our stereotypes. There's so much more that we can do. And hopefully this webinar, this very short webinar, has given you some idea of what we can do professionally and personally to ensure that equality for all, in particular ethnic minorities. So I just want to say a huge thanks to the panel, and a huge thanks to you guys for giving up an hour of your time to be a part of this discussion. Thank you very much.